The US military is not equipped for peace or war. Although the entire project would upend the existing quo, it would be significantly less costly and disruptive than the alternative. The world economy may plunge right into a slump if China chose to go to war with the US. Over the years, Americans have become far too used to the idea that they are militarily superior, and that the US military is not equipped for peace or war. Delusion of security has left us exposed by causing us to neglect important upkeep. We can reclaim our power to discourage our enemies because we have done so in the past. George H.W. Bush considered Pearl Harbor's lessons around the 50th anniversary of the attack during the Soviet Union's decline. Even though the war was ended, he learned a valuable lesson from it when it comes to national defense. George Washington once stated, "One of the most effective ways to preserve peace is to be prepared for war." President Ronald Reagan adopted the tenet of peace through strength, echoing the sentiments of his predecessor. The American arsenal played a significant role in maintaining the peace during the previous 40 years, but political indifference has caused it to deteriorate, while other countries' war engines have accelerated. The majority of Americans are unaware that the threat of a major power war has reappeared. The time to rebuild America's military is long overdue. By being ready for conflict, we can prevent it. Senior military officials from the United States have told my colleagues and me in closed-door testimony before the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee that we are facing some of the most hazardous global threat scenarios since World War II. Then, they add to that frightening image by stating that there is a chance that our military forces will be outgunned and outclassed. Our military infrastructure is antiquated, our fleet of fighter jets is dangerously tiny, and we struggle to construct and maintain ships. Meanwhile, the enemies of the United States are strengthening their armed forces and becoming more belligerent. China's leader, Xi Jinping, has led the nation's historic military modernization program with the goal of taking advantage of the shortcomings in the US military. In terms of fleet size, he has surpassed the US Navy and constructed one of the biggest. That hypothetical future could arrive sooner than most Americans anticipate. An increasing consensus of experts suggests that within a few years we might find ourselves in a condition of acute vulnerability. At a time when China's military in particular is becoming more proficient, our military preparedness may be at its lowest point in decades. The US commander in the Indo-Pacific region unveiled a list of $11 billion in unfunded items for combatant commands and services, which I believe to be the largest list ever. It asked for financing for a wide range of missile defense, targeting, and infrastructure projects that would be essential in a conflict in the Pacific. China, however, has no such issues since it has amassed the greatest hypersonic arsenal. Our military commanders are faced with difficult decisions to make. The Navy is unable to properly address the three issues of munition purchase, regular maintenance, and new ship funding. We just agreed to sell Australia submarines, but because we haven't funded our own submarine industrial base adequately, our outdated fleet isn't ready to take on new threats. There is a chance of delays and insufficient funding for two of the three most significant nuclear upgrading initiatives. From training fields to dormitories, the military has a backlog of basic maintenance totaling at least $180 billion. Because we are sending military personnel overseas, I am going to be releasing a strategy on Wednesday that has a number of specific recommendations to deal with this reality head-on. The Reagan military build-up has been our only source of power for far too long. It's time for improvements and adjustments. My plan explains why and how the US should strive to increase military expenditure from 2.9% of GDP this year to 5% over the following 5 to 7 years, with an additional $55 billion to be spent on the military in the fiscal year 2025. It would be a big expenditure that would force us to re-evaluate our country's spending priorities. It would be a big expenditure that would force us to re-evaluate our country's spending priorities. My plan would produce at least 340 more fighter aircraft in 5 years, stopping our Air Force's fleet reduction and increasing the Navy to 357 ships by 2035. This will assist in closing short-term gaps and placing every fleet on a path towards sustainability, along with accelerating the modernization of the Army and Marine Corps and investing in joint capabilities that are all too often overlooked, such as munitions and logistics. The proposal would also restock the Air Force's tanker and training fleets. In order to strengthen our defense and the defenses of our allies, the plan would expand on the $3.3 billion in financing for submarine industrial bases that was included in the National Security Supplemental that was enacted in April. It would also quickly provide cutting-edge technology to servicemen worldwide. Although the entire project would upend the existing quo, it would be significantly less costly and disruptive than the alternative. The world economy may plunge right into a slump if China chose to go to war with the US. Over the years, Americans have become far too used to the idea that they are militarily superior, and that delusion of security has left us exposed by causing us to neglect important upkeep. We can reclaim our power to discourage our enemies because we have done so in the past. George H.W. Bush considered Pearl Harbor's lessons around the 50th anniversary of the attack during the Soviet Union's decline.